Konnichiwa, fellow armchair General Samas. This is Gamer 1745 here with the start of a new series. It's been a while, but I think we're back to Japan again. And which calling the series Tojo's War. Okay, and that sort of gives us our general guide to our goals and objectives. This series is to fight Japan, more or less, historical, more or less. What would Tojo do? Which, of course, you know, what would Tojo do? Necessarily a good thing. Don't get me wrong. There has been a lot of work on Japan since I did sort of start our research, but Japanese sub tree has been done, including the aircraft carrier subs. I don't know if you're aware of this, but a bunch of different models of Japanese subs could carry aircraft. Mostly just one aircraft. Way down here is I-400. Is this guy here. It was like a yeah, the I-400 class here. This is a huge beast of the size of a submarine, and in this tube that runs from here all the way along there, that was a like I say, a tube that would house 3 airplanes, I believe it was, under type. Now and it varied over time. Some of the earlier ones I do know that you had to actually take the wings off and put the wings on. Once you got them out here, this was a crane on them, on there, you'd get them, slide them forward, and put the wings on them and other stuff, and then launch them off a catapult on the earlier ones. I don't know whether the later ones had folding wings, anything but rapid. And they were made for scouting primarily, though the sort of the I-400s were also sort of thought and start doing early, but it takes 7 years at a time. Sometimes to develop. Where I believe somewhat developed as a class to go after the Panama blocks, blow them up and disrupt. U.S. trade and ship move have a rather nice, which they had before, air tree. Continued work, it looked like. I don't remember exactly, but it had before. For ship types, and this is definitely an improved tank tree. I think we're gonna stay away from heavy kind of stuff, but I did want to get tank and development. Then the rest is trees with Japanese flavor. So we have that, and national focus tree. Biggest change, I will say, when looking around with this 2.5 of a version of Black Ice is that I've quickly looked at was the German one. Huge. But we'll be back to playing Germany. Trust me, we will be there. I just didn't want to immediately go right back after the last Britain. We're going to, this looks like be really good, but it's 70 days. This is just 35 days, half as long. We might as well start it, get the recruitable population up a little. Get that done. More. Because nothing is really happening. aircraft back. 2 on no yard, no sub yard, shipyard. 7 on back. On Japanese Air Force. Black ice. This event is intended to provide background information on the air arm of the IGN and the IGA. That's Japanese Imperial Japanese Navy and Imperial Japanese Army air arms, as well as information about how the Japanese aircraft. Yes. Both the Imperial Japanese Army and the Imperial Japanese Navy had their own air arms. Two divided between the two ran deep enough that even many of the companies that built aircraft were contracted exclusively for service. In addition to carrier aircraft, the IGN developed its own land-based fighters and bombers. Yeah, this is interesting, and I was thinking about this the other day. Tell you something, guys. I sort of write books in my head at times. And you think, wow, I'd like to maybe read one of those books or something. Sort of historical novels. I don't know that you would, because it would sort of be overall plot line only and interesting scenes. I am a terrible physical writer, typist, shall we say. And if I have to slow down to even literally thinking about spelling, not that I can't, I can spell, but that's a process that really slows up the creative. And I know I could try to do what I'm doing here and talking it into the computer, but I don't know if I have the skill enough to actually write something good, coherent, that you would want to read. But I just sort of, you know, when driving a car or trying to quiet my mind, I think about various plot lines and things. But sort of coming up in one of those things recently, I was thinking about error, and how it was different. So I was sort of reading up a little bit more on Charles Lindbergh. You know, the guy who first person to alone, there had been others, fly non-stop, not just from somewhere like Nova Scotia to Ireland, but from somewhere, I believe, New York, or outside of New York City, but there to actually Paris's Orly airport, which movie starring James Stewart. It was a big open field with hangars around the outside of it, but flew all the way across there, so it was a tremendous thing, and not just the shortest possible. Many of you may know he was a big proponent in the America First. And this is what's sort of given some with Trump with his America First. Now, they're different things, and very different things. But the earlier America First was a America out of the conflict, particularly in Europe, where it was focused. That America should not be involved in, and it started, I don't know if it was actually started in 38, but it was definitely going by sometime in 39 when the actual war broke out. Europe. Is that America should not enter into another major European war. It wasn't a pacifist movement. It wasn't a America should never be involved in a war, but just the messy politics of Europe should not cost American lives. And like a lot of movements like that, and I know this isn't a place to go into too much detail, but various political factions will grab onto it for its own time. Now, Lindbergh was a leading spokesperson for it, shall we say, which angered FDR, and FDR made some public comments questioning Lindbergh's patriotism. So at that point, he was I guess, reserve status or whatever, an officer, and this is getting to the point, in the Army Air Corps, because he had been an active Army Air Corps pilot before. So he resigns his commission. Well, once the war breaks out with Japan, instead of the U.S. getting involved in a European war with Japan attacking Pearl Harbor, this, of course, outrages Lindbergh, and he wants back into the Air Force. Oh, the Air Force. It's the Army Air Force, isn't it? Black Ice comment. But sort of, I would say a petty move by FDR is he personally blocks Lindbergh from getting back into the armed forces. So, Lindbergh, during this, hope this is somewhat of interest, during this time, gets consulting jobs for some of these guys, making American fighters, or airplanes. And during that, after a while, doing some of that, and supposedly doing some good work. Oh, in the interworld, getting more story to it, it's disrupting the thing. His eldest, Charles Lindbergh Jr., is kidnapped as a toddler, just out of being a baby, and is found murdered, and has a big trial. And because it's the trial of the century in like 1928 or something like that, it is one of the big trials, the Lindbergh baby trial. He and his wife, and I think maybe another girl child, or because he has more children later on, but escape America because just the press is just hounding them horrendously. So for about 3 years, he lives in Europe. I think in mainly France, but he tours and writes reports and flies like the ME-109 and writes reports that go back to the U.S. government, and then also tours and flies some Soviet aircraft, writing reports going back to the U.S. government. And I understand they were also later, at some point, shared with the United Kingdom government. So even though he is, at this time, this is before the America First project, so this is sort of, he meets some high-ranking Nazi, including Goering and whatever, and so, but he's touring around doing this kind of stuff, and he's writing reports and evaluating these aircraft that he's eventually enemy aircraft that and he makes some interesting comments even at the time before it gets started about some of the stuff. This is not turned into a complete Lindbergh episode, but so he has some experience with evaluating aircraft, including modern aircraft, and it isn't just, oh, he did this way back in the 20s, and now here's the 1940s, and he's pushing himself. He's actively helping and evaluating. Well, he gets himself appointed, I forget, one of the major aircraft producers in the Pacific, as a local evaluator, observer, or whatever, for the aircraft, to write reports and send back, how, what breaks on the aircraft, what doesn't break on the aircraft. You can imagine maintaining aircraft, in rough conditions and everything else like this. So, small tweaks, major tweaks, whatever it is, he's writing reports and stuff. Well, during this time, he flies at least 50 combat missions as a civilian against the Japanese. So he's a combat pilot. I don't know if they were, because I just skimmed some of the stuff, I don't know whether they were all like fighter pilot missions or bomber pilot missions, but as a civilian, he flies combat missions against the Japanese. So, and to get back to this, once the war is over, once it's under Truman, and you're forming the United States Air Force, he applies again to be let back into the Air Force. And Truman allows this, and actually brings him in as a brigadier general. Mentioning the brigadier general part, he's again mostly, I think, just evaluating aircraft. I don't think he has any major, commands as a brigadier general, commanding a bomber force or whatever else. A friend of mine, and I saw it years ago, owned Lindbergh's staff car. that was sort of abandoned and got. It was painted Air Force blue. It was a Model A Ford coupe. Nothing fancy. If you look up a Model A Ford coupe, and it was a 1930s car in the late 1940s, early 1950s. So it was nothing fancy, but it was faded because it was left for years, parked out at one of the Desert Air Force bases in California. So it's this faded Air Force blue with all the, including who owns it, Air Force staff car markings on it. So, yeah. But, which gets to the point of, it's after World War II, the U.S. finally creates an Air Force. Before and during World War II, there is the Army Air Forces that, in a practical sense, especially by the time you're getting to the bombing campaigns, Germany and such, it's an independent branch in a practical sense. But it is still a subordinate part army. And of course, the Navy has its air forces. Where Britain, I'm not exactly sure, but I do believe during World War I, created an independent air force. And so during World War II, it had its independent air force. Germany, and I don't know what was really going on. I know there. I think the air operations in Germany were primarily an army operation. There was also a naval World War I German air forces, if you. But for World War II, Germany had created an independent air force, and so did Italy. Now, we can see, and again, this is long-winded, whatever, but we can see here that Japan really, to the point, has two air forces. Unlike the U.S. Navy air arm, if you will, was primarily a carrier-based air arm that also had some flying boats and other sort of immediate support aircraft. But a very, I believe, someone could point to me if I'm wrong, but most of the air operations that were operating, and now, of course, you also have a very small Marine Air Force, too, but most of the air operations that are operating, that are done by the Americans, are done by not just most of the land, just most of the air operations are done by the Army Air Corps. So, in here. So, it's really predominantly a Army show. Where Japan, you have both land-based air operations by both the Army and the Navy. And so this really is sort of messing with production, because you're producing two standard, if you will, type fighter types that are going on, and it's really sort of redundant and not necessarily very good. But the downside is, for having an independent air force, is in Germany, the Graf Zeppelin, as in the carrier, never gets completed. Do you know why it never gets completed? Well, I know on a basic level. I mean, it's not in the detail, but Goering insisted that anything that flies is the Luftwaffe. There are some exceptions, like the little Stork aircraft or whatever that sometimes was under control, but the naval bombers that I love so much, both the flying boats and the land-based wheel-based naval bombers, were all Luftwaffe. But those pilots were sort of a special corps of pilots that were also trained on how to be at sea. And trust me, there's more to being at sea than just flying over, including navigation is part of it, especially when you're not just, oh, well, all I need to do is, try to hit a point on land. No, it's trying to navigate, fly in various lines, and do search patterns over seas and things like that, plus being able to land, and not just as in a flying boat land at sea, that's part of it, but crash land at sea and get out with your paddles and your boats. And there's a lot more training you need to do to be a naval aviator than a ground aviator. And so that is an important thing to do. So anything that flies is going to be the Luftwaffe. Well, a carrier needs aircraft. Well, is that a priority of Goring? No, he's got to win the air war, so he's not going to do it. And does the Navy want to fly around Luftwaffe aircraft? So the Navy's uninterested. There's no carrier school advocate group that is of significant status, you know. So in the Germans' Navy, you have, you know, and I don't know all the details, but, you know, surface fleet advocate. You know, they want to get battleships out there and shoot at other battleships and win the battle that way. You got submarine advocates who cares where the enemy battleships are. The point is to deny, particularly Britain, but to deny the enemy the use of the seas to transport supplies, goods, troops. It doesn't matter who has the biggest battleships. We're just going to sink enough, at least, of all their transports, and we're going to win the war that way. So those are the two main. And you also have sort of covert commerce raiding groups and some other stuff. But so those are sort of the main groups. So you don't have a carrier advocate group because they weren't going to. And in essence, it was a sort of a bad situation. That also for years, and I don't know how the current status, but for years, the post-war Italy had problems with trying to figure out what to do for a carrier situation. I know post-World War II, they had a similar sort of things that fly are the Italian Air Force, things that sit in the water are the Italian Navy, and so didn't necessarily work well together. Now, in the modern U.S. Army or U.S. Armed Forces, anything that has wings now is in the Air Force or it's in the Navy, in which the Navy includes the U.S. Marines. So if it has wings, it's either Navy or Air Force. If it has rotary wings, meaning helicopters, they can be anywhere, but mostly they're going to be in the Navy or the Army. So the Army has control. This is why you have problems with. We are flying in the United States still the A-10 Warhawk, which is a wonderful aircraft, but it is solely designed to shoot things on the ground, and it does so excellent. But they're ancient now, and either we need to build a whole new big batch of them, or we need to build a big batch of Warthog 3s, because they're currently Warthog 2, you know, meaning an updated design. But the Air Force wants to control the air, and A-10s suck at controlling the air because they're meant to control the ground, and control the ground in close proximity. So you have to sort of look at competing models as, you know, what's the purpose of an Air Force? And I will say this, and I'm outside of delivery of nuclear weapons, the Air Force as an independent military operation sucks. Yeah, I know, I forget which one of you I was talking about with, you know, Curtis LeMay and Bomber Harris, and they, you know, love the bombing. Now, air power does not win wars. Air power can tip the balance in a war, but it alone does not win wars. Wars are either naval operations or ground operations, because eventually you've got to put ships at sea, or you've got to put troops on the ground. And so without that, you don't win a war. Again, short of nuclear weapons, because you could obliterate everybody and call it done. So, Japan is not wrong in having two branches. It's just that they took it to the extreme. It's a long way to get there. Hope there's especially the stuff about Lindbergh. Looking through this stuff, a little Japanese air unit list of the following: ID fighter bombers. They currently make aircraft are placeholders. Are workarounds. Tell unique aircraft. Okay. It is not recommended or necessary to research all the air techs. Only research what you will be producing within the next year. Only produce what you need. Okay, and as to that, having already looked at this briefly here, like, I have no plans on researching this because it is not needed or dependent to get down here for the 38 technologies. We will see how much of the fighter army stuff we will do. We may very well do some light bomber and CAS kind of operations. We're definitely, when it comes time, going to do some flying boat and other naval bombers to help control the oceans. I am planning on the A6M1, which is commonly known as Zeros, using that as my primary sort of fighter type. It should be useful for both carrier and ground base. It is generally superior to a lot of these guys, generally speaking, which models, but what I may still come and do one or more something in here depending on the year date is if these look to be cheaper production, that may be cheaper production. So we're going to pick and choose what we're going to try to do. Yeah, it's maybe why I don't have so many views. I get sidetracked into talking about Lindbergh on something like this when I series. Hope it's interesting. I just find it interesting to see how things like, do you have an air force or not? And then will you allow, say, preparation for games? Ooh. Okay. Well, maybe it's because it's the newspaper. I think they're supposed to have two mods clicked for this to work right. One is the basic black ice mod. The other, well, they're all showing up, I think. Maybe it was just that one hasn't been done. Is the sort of graphics enhancement mod. Okay, we can sign off on it. Who gets? Yeah, we'll do. Power game. We have some ministers and such. I really haven't looked at them much at the moment. Yeah. A different one. Now, Japan had a very unstable government during this time. Very unstable. I believe it was 35 that the Prime Minister was assassinated by a different political faction. Sort of worrying is any of those, but I'm getting these others. Okay. Graphics pending. Okay, February 26th incident. On the 26th of February, a group of young military officers attempt a coup d'etat. The radical Coup d'etat faction in the military assassinated several prominent politicians, but failed to assassinate. Failed. Unlike in the aftermath of the previous attempt, the surviving perpetrators were given secret trials and shot. So we purged them without going public on, I guess. Ceremonies. Right now, I am just patient. Primarily. National unity changes. Our nation's mood is changing for the better or worse. Okay. Oh, we've gone through a lot of stock here. Good. Okay, well. Sort of stacked it. Oh. A little better. So as this comes, try to get through some of these guys quicker instead of slowly work. Our deficit. We need more oil. Properly. Okay, so getting all the oil we can out of Manchu. US. Let's go with right now. 2. Let's go. Add a couple of new civil factories, primarily to pay for oil and such. Okay. Okay, so we've expanded that military. So these are the big Zaibatsu. DC and Sui. Military, dockyards, civil, both. Okay. And or let's again see what we need more of. Okay, heavy machine deficit. Now, one thing I do have a look brief a little bit at, that it looks like we have much better air zones size. Now, compared to our most recent and I messed up British campaign, and this is another reason, and I was very close to playing Britain again, just to watch it. Is like this is broken into North Africa zones, better air zone, because what happens is some of this is micromanagement. In that, since you can't put up fighters, say right here in this province, have them cover those 3 zones as needed. You have to do each one that is, for me, a problem. But what these zones allow is things like CAS, plus their support, to be more effective because of their shorter range. Well, yeah. Okay, the 150 scale. Army experience, none of it. Well, normally the first thing we will be tackling is a war with China, so let's get the experience and reduce doctrine. Unlike when we were playing at Germany, Britain, a lot of these World War I texts are unresearched. So we have those. Okay, there. Not that we have to get them all, but I think most all of them are to one degree useful. So, gotta keep that. Okay, we're looking at here. Here. Well, some of them. I wish this and that other. And one of the factories built factory. Okay. Those Mongolians? No, those are just Soviet troops of Asian background, probably. Okay, Republic of China, no deal. Am I hungry? Okay, we'll do that. Alright, okay, we'll do. Now, it's another interesting thing was, probably many of you know that, particularly during the 20s, but did to some degree go into the 30s, China was the warlord era. And particularly in the 20s, you have very strong factions that this is a bit more through this sort of map. By the time you're getting into the 30s, most of these factions, like the Ma clique, the Guijing clique, Matma, and who I believe, has some association with the clique, and other Chinese viewers, for my bad pronunciation of Chinese, don't have the background. But, and of course, post corrections to the bad history that I give, because I'm sure I'll get some of it wrong, and I want to learn too. Okay, but understanding that even though most of these groups here are still real cliques under the Republic of China in 1936, they're all giving at least lip service to the idea of a unified China. They aren't trying to, the one, well, is sort of giving lip service, but it should be their version is the communists, of course. But so the idea is that it's not quite as maybe big as it appears here, as in separate countries during this period. but and sort of to a point, why they're using these flags, sort of shows. You see here the different flags, and I'm glad they sort of did this as sort of that they're all sort of nationalist China, with various factions within it. And so there was a lot of arms imports into China during this time. And the main facilitator of the arms imports into China was Japan. They were mostly European arms manufacturers. They were mostly sold through Japanese middlemen. And so what cuts off a lot of Japan's what cuts off a lot of China's access to European arms is that once Japan goes to war with China, all of these merchants stop facilitating the deals. Okay, so we can do this. Only is a negative 10, 8, 10% bomb vulnerability. I think I wanted to go this path. I think I do. I don't know how much bombing we're going to get, and I don't know that I'm going to need to jump around a lot between various models. So we're going to go this, which these over here do influence my choice, that if you've got a bunch of them pre-researched, you don't want to have to go through it again, but it's just one of them and at the lowest level. So it's like a loss of 51 days. So we're going to do that. And so we're going to need a steel industry, I think. Well, we're already importing steel from America and Manchukuo, but Manchukuo trades for steel is basically one factory getting everything. Well, at this point, I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to thank you for liking the videos, and of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for many great episodes to come, I hope, of this series, and of rambling talks by me that I hope are of some interest. And like I was saying before, please post questions, comments, suggestions, ideas. I really love hearing from you, and like corrections, like very much so. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.